The first step to using jQuery is to obtain the latest version of the code and then to add it to your web pages. Keep in mind that jQuery is just JavaScript. It can't do anything that JavaScript can't do, and it needs to be included in the pages the same exact way. The most common method of acquiring the jQuery library is just to download it. The most current version is always available from the jQuery website, and the address is just jQuery.com. If you visit jQuery.com and you click the download button right here, it's going to go ahead and it's going to take you to Google's code repository where you can grab the latest production compression level version. All you need to do is save the file to a place where your HTML files can see it. So I usually make a folder within my root directory of the site I'm working on. I usually have a scripts folder anyways, and I just put it in there. But this basically is the minified version of the jQuery library. You'll notice on the jQuery website that you can actually get the production version, which is the minified one, and the development version. I mentioned this in a previous title, but the difference is that the development version, it's longer, it's also quite a bit larger, it's uncompressed code, and it is commented. So if you actually want to find out more as far as what's going on within the JavaScript, this would be a good place. I generally just use the minified version though because it's so much smaller. The footprint is 29K compared to 212K. So that's definitely a significant difference in the file size. But this is basically all you need to get started with jQuery. So once you have saved that into your folder where you're going to be developing your site, all you need to do to make it work is you need to tell the HTML file to include the jQuery library by using a script tag inside the head section of your HTML document. And basically the script tag could look something like this. Here's my head tag, I would have the title here, and then it would say script src is equal to scripts / jQuery-1.5 min.js. That's just pointing to the current minified version. And the type is just going to be text / JavaScript, and then you close the script tag. So it's a really standard JavaScript tag. We also have another script tag that you're going to need to put in the code, and you can see that this one basically says script src equals scripts / and it says script.js. This file right here is a script tag that's pointing to a JavaScript file. This is where we'll run all of our own jQuery code. So the first script tag is going to basically load the jQuery library. The second script tag is actually where we'll put all of our own jQuery and JavaScript code. So when you download the library, that's the most common approach. But you can also add and include the jQuery library by taking advantage of Google's Content Delivery Network, or CDN. A CDN is a network of computers that's specifically designed to serve content to users in a fast and scalable manner. Google hosts several popular open source libraries on their CDN, including jQuery and the jQuery UI. So instead of hosting the jQuery files on your own web server, you can have Google pick up the bandwidth and serve up the jQuery JS file for you. By using Google, you benefit from speed and reliability of Google's vast infrastructure, with the added bonus that you'll always be using the latest version of jQuery. In addition, many users will have already downloaded jQuery from Google when they visited another site, so it'll already be waiting to be used within their cache. This results in significantly faster load times. You can include more heavy jQuery library via the same method, and in order to include the jQuery from the Google CDN, you're going to use a similar type of code inside your head tag, but your script tag now is just going to point to where the jQuery library resides on the Google server. So the address is http://ajax.googleapis.com /ajax/libs /jQuery/1.5.1, which is the current version, /jQuery.min.js. And then the rest of the script is exactly the same. The jQuery file would now be pulled from Google instead of from your own server. In this example right here, I'm specifying the version of jQuery, and if you happen to like the latest and greatest, you can remove the end number. So I could get rid of this 1 and it would just say 1.5, and this will basically return the latest release available in the 1.5 series. You might want to be cautious though doing this. I mean, in theory that sounds like a great idea, but you just want to be cautious because you may need to look for any new library changes that might affect your existing functionality. And then the final way of incorporating jQuery into your project is a little bit more advanced, and you basically are going to obtain the jQuery library as the nightly builds. And these are automated builds of the library that include all the new code added or modified during the course of the day, and they're referred to as the nightlies or the subversions. They are untested though, and they can lead to bugs and are subject to frequent changes. So I don't usually recommend that you get the nightlies or the subversions. I usually would just download the current version or point to Google server and grab the version that I want to use. In addition to the version, we already kind of talked about the compressed or the uncompressed versions when I was telling you about the minified version or the actual development version that is available. And basically they are basically the exact same code as I mentioned. In most situations, the minified version is the one that you'll want to use. The jQuery source code is simply compressed, and spaces like line breaks, they've been removed, variable names have been shortened, and the result is the exact same library but is a much smaller JS file. So it's great for helping speed up your page requests and reducing bandwidth and stuff like that to the end user. The downside, of course, is that the compressed file is completely unreadable. So if you do look at the, jQuery, the JavaScript, it's, you're not going to know what it looks like. So we already kind of talked about that, but just keep that in mind. All right. The next thing we're going to be talking about is the anatomy of a jQuery script. Including jQuery in your page gives you access to a single function called jQuery. It's through the one function that jQuery is going to expose hundreds of powerful tools to help add more dimension to your web page. The jQuery library is contained in the jQuery namespaces. And namespacing is a great approach for playing nicely with other code on the page. So when you're using a lot of jQuery, it's going to quickly become annoying, perhaps, to have to type in the full jQuery function for every command that we use. So instead, jQuery provides a shorter alias for accessing the library, and that is simply to use the $. This is a totally valid variable name, so you'll see this a lot as we progress through the course. I just want to dissect a jQuery statement here so you can begin to get familiar with how jQuery looks. A jQuery command begins with a call to the jQuery function or to its alias, which is the $, of course. So in this particular jQuery statement, and I actually have two here, they're going to basically show the variants of the same jQuery statement. The first one is using the full function, and then the second one is using the alias. So you can see here it says jQuery, and here it has the $. This section of the code is referred to as a selector. This is the action, and this part is the parameters. And when you see the code, it's not going to be all spaced out like this. I just spaced it out so we could kind of dissect this and place it in selector, action, and parameters. So each command is made up of these following parts. The overall part is the jQuery function or its alias. So that's this part right here, jQuery or the $. And then we're going to use a selector to select one or more elements on the web page. So in this example, we're choosing the paragraph tags. Next, we're going to choose an action to be applied to each element we've selected, and you'll see more and more actions as we implement different effects throughout the course. And finally, you're going to specify some sort of parameters that you want to tell jQuery exactly how we want to apply the chosen action. So whenever you see jQuery code, especially when you just start out, it's a good idea to try to break it into these component parts. It's going to make it a lot easier to comprehend when you begin using it if you understand the component parts. So remember, the function is going to either be jQuery or the alias. Then you're going to have the selector, which is the P in this case. Then we're going to have the action, which in this case is CSS, and then we're going to have the parameters. So in this example, what we're doing is we're asking the selector to select all the paragraph tags on the page, and then we are going to use jQuery's CSS action, which is used to modify a CSS property, and we're going to modify the CSS property of paragraph elements that were initially selected, and then we're going to pass on the parameters to set the color of all the paragraphs to blue. So the result is going to be any paragraph on our web page would turn blue. So in this example, two parameters, both color and blue, are being passed to the CSS action, but the number of parameters that are passed to an action can vary. Some require no parameters, some accept multiple sets of parameters, like for changing a bunch of properties at once, and some require that we specify another JavaScript function for running code when an event, such as an element being clicked, happens. But all the commands are going to follow this basic anatomy that we're showing right here. The next thing I want to talk about is HTML and the DOM. So DOM stands for Document Object Model, and basically jQuery has been designed to integrate seamlessly with HTML and CSS. Using CSS selectors that you know, for example, something like div #nav, that's going to refer to a div element with an ID of nav applied to it. The DOM, it doesn't pertain specifically to jQuery. It's actually just a standard way of representing objects in HTML that all browsers agree to follow. A good working knowledge of the DOM and how to use it well is going to ensure a successful understanding of how to use jQuery. The DOM is basically bits of rendered HTML. It's a hierarchical representation of your HTML markup, where each element, such as a div or a P, has a parent, which is its container, and can also have one or more nested child elements. So each element can have an ID, or it can have one or more class attributes applied to it, which are generally assigned in the HTML source file. And when a browser reads an HTML page and constructs the DOM, it's going to display it as a web page comprising of objects that either sit there looking pretty like a static page does, or more interestingly are going to be manipulated by our code. So in here, this kind of shows a DOM fragment, and as you can see, the body has two child, or in this case 3 child elements. It has an H1 and 2 paragraph elements, and then these 3 elements are basically contained in the same parent element, and they are, in relationship to each other, referred to as siblings. An element's ID would uniquely identify the element on the page. So if I wanted to be able to identify this paragraph and not this one, I would not need to make sure that both of these paragraphs were, or at least one of them, was identified with an ID. So I could say, hey, have the paragraph called left turn, all the text is going to turn purple or something like that. But I could specify this paragraph as opposed to this one. And you can see that the body and the head elements are basically children of the HTML tag. So if we have some code, here's another example, div with an ID of footer, and then there's some information in that div, and then I close the div tag. Here, the div has been assigned an ID of footer, and it uses an ID because it's unique. There should only be one, and there should only be one item on the page that is only ever going to be called div with an ID of footer. The DOM also lets us assign the same name to multiple page elements via the class attribute. So this is usually done on elements that share a characteristic, such as the next example, where I have a paragraph with a class of error. So this is a required field. This paragraph is going to have the class of error, and then I also have a span tag that has a class assigned to it as well. So both of these things are sharing the same characteristics. If I made a CSS rule that said that error was going to make all the text red, well, anything in the paragraph as well as anything that appeared within the span tag are going to appear red. So when you write your CSS, you can hook elements by ID with a hash symbol or by class with a period. And that's pretty standard as far as CSS is concerned. So here you can see that if I wanted to style the footer to have a black border, I would hook the footer div by saying hash footer, and then I would assign my CSS attributes. And here, if I wanted to assign the error class, I would just write .error, and then I would tell it to make all the text red or something like that. So these CSS rules are going to do standard CSS, styling, basically, making the footer have a black border, making the error class have the text turn red. So when it comes time to write some jQuery, you're going to find that knowing about CSS selectors and the DOM are going to become really important. Remember that jQuery uses the same syntax as CSS for selecting elements on the page to manipulate. So once you've mastered selecting, then the rest of it just falls into place thanks to jQuery.